The muddy water had risen so fast that Sarah Prescott barely had time to grab her mother's recipe book before the entire bakery was swallowed by the raging Chena River. And now, she stood on the highest point of what remained of her property in Fairbanks, Alaska, watching everything she had worked for disappear beneath the churning brown flood that had transformed her beloved town into a waterlogged nightmare in the spring of 1898. She had spent 3 years building that bakery from nothing, kneading dough before dawn and staying awake past midnight to perfect the sourdough starter her mother had given her before consumption took her life. The recipes inside that leather-bound book were all Sarah had left of her family now, the only connection to a past that seemed impossibly distant as she watched tables, chairs, her prized cast-iron stove, and sacks of flour that represented her life savings float away like meaningless debris. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the cold spring rain that continued to fall from the gray Alaska sky. "Miss, you need to get to higher ground." The voice came from behind her, deep and urgent. Sarah turned to find a tall cowboy on horseback, his dark hair plastered to his forehead from the rain, his brown eyes filled with genuine concern. He wore weather-beaten leather chaps and a wool coat that had seen better days, and he sat atop a massive bay horse that seemed unfazed by the rushing water that now lapped at its knees. "There's nothing left," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "Everything is gone." The cowboy dismounted, his boots splashing into the water as he moved toward her with surprising grace. "Not everything. You're still here, and that book in your hands looks mighty important." He gestured to the recipe book she clutched against her chest. "Come on now, we need to move before this whole area goes under." "I don't even know you," Sarah protested weakly, though she knew he was right. The water was rising faster now, and the small hill where she stood would be underwater within the hour. "Name's Owen Walker. I came up from Montana 6 months back, working at the lumber camp north of town. Right now, none of that matters. What matters is getting you somewhere safe." He held out his hand, rough and calloused from hard work. "Please." Something in his eyes made Sarah trust him. Perhaps it was the desperation of the moment, or maybe it was the genuine kindness she saw there, but she took his hand. His grip was strong and warm despite the cold rain, and he helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. His arms came around her as he took the reins, and Sarah felt an unexpected sense of safety as they rode through the flooded streets of Fairbanks. The town was in chaos. People shouted from rooftops, families huddled together on second-story balconies, and makeshift boats navigated the submerged streets. Owen guided his horse with practiced ease, avoiding the strongest currents and steering clear of debris that could injure the animal. Sarah watched her world transform into something unrecognizable, every familiar landmark now distorted by the rising water. They rode for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, climbing the hills east of town, until they reached a small cabin nestled among spruce trees. The structure was simple but sturdy, built from thick logs with a stone chimney that promised warmth. Owen dismounted first, then helped Sarah down, his hands steady on her waist as she slid from the horse. "This is your place?" she asked, looking at the cabin. "It is now." "Built it myself when I first arrived. Figured I might stay in Alaska a while, see what opportunities the gold rush brings." He led the horse to a small stable behind the cabin, and Sarah followed, unsure what else to do. Everything felt surreal, like she was moving through someone else's life. Inside the stable, Owen removed the saddle and began rubbing down his horse with practiced efficiency. Sarah watched, clutching her mother's recipe book like a lifeline. The stable was clean and well organized, with fresh hay in the stall and tools hung neatly on the walls. Whatever else Owen Walker might be, he clearly took good care of his animals. "You can go inside if you want," Owen said, glancing at her. "Doors unlocked. Get yourself warm by the fire." "You left it burning?" Sarah asked, surprised. "Banking fire." "Keeps the cabin from freezing, but safe enough if you know what you're doing." He continued working on the horse, checking its hooves for debris. "Coffee pot should still be warm, too. Help yourself." Sarah hesitated, then made her way to the cabin. Inside, it was sparse but comfortable. A single room served as living space, kitchen, and bedroom, with a rope bed in one corner covered with wool blankets, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a stone fireplace that indeed held a low fire. She set her recipe book carefully on the table and moved to warm her hands by the flames, shivering as heat slowly seeped back into her cold, wet body. The door opened, and Owen entered, removing his wet hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. "I'll get that fire built up. You should get out of those wet clothes before you catch pneumonia." He paused, seeming to realize how that sounded. "I've got spare blankets. You can wrap up in those while your dress dries." Sarah felt her cheeks flush. "I couldn't impose like that." "Miss Prescott, unless I miss my guess, you just lost everything in that flood. Seems to me worrying about propriety right now is less important than staying alive and healthy." His tone was gentle but firm. "I'll turn my back and you tell me when you're decent." He was right, of course. Her dress was soaked through, and she was shivering so hard her teeth chattered. "How did you know my name?" Owen smiled slightly as he turned to face the wall. "Everyone in Fairbanks knows Sarah Prescott's bakery. Best sourdough bread north of Seattle. I've bought from you a dozen times over the winter." Sarah had served so many customers she couldn't remember individual faces, but something about Owen's voice sparked a vague recognition. She quickly shed her wet dress and undergarments, wrapping herself in the thick wool blankets he had indicated. They smelled of wood smoke and something else, something masculine and not unpleasant. "All right," she said quietly. Owen turned back, and his eyes held only respectful concern as he assessed her. "Good. Now sit by the fire while I make us some real food. You look half-starved, and we've got a long night ahead." He moved around the small kitchen with surprising competence, pulling out a tin of coffee, a slab of bacon, and some potatoes from a wooden crate. Sarah watched as he built up the fire, filled a battered coffee pot with water from a barrel in the corner, and began slicing the bacon with a sharp knife. "You lived alone long?" Sarah found herself asking. "Most of my life," Owen replied, laying the bacon in a cast-iron skillet. The sizzle and smell soon filled the cabin. "My folks died when I was young, ranch accident down in Montana. I've been working other people's cattle, doing odd jobs, moving around. When the gold rush started, I figured Alaska might offer something different. Did you try prospecting?" Owen shook his head. "I'm a cowboy, not a miner, but miners need lumber, they need meat, they need supplies. Figured I could make a steadier living providing those things than freezing in a creek bed hoping to strike it rich." He flipped the bacon with a fork. "What about you? How did a young woman end up running a bakery in Fairbanks?" Sarah pulled the blankets tighter around herself. "My mother taught me to bake. After she died, my father and I came north, thinking the gold rush would bring opportunity. He was right in a way. All these miners needed food. But father died the first winter, pneumonia." Her voice caught. "I used what little money we had left to open the bakery. That was 3 years ago. 3 years running a business on your own in this territory. That takes real grit." Owen poured the coffee, dark and strong, and handed her a tin cup. "Here. This will help. The coffee was bitter and perfect, warming her from the inside out. Owen finished cooking, dividing the simple meal between two tin plates. They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the rain still drumming on the roof. "What will you do now?" Owen asked finally. Sarah stared into her coffee cup. "I don't know. Everything I had was in that bakery, my supplies, my equipment, my savings. I have nothing left. You have your skills, you have your recipes." Owen gestured to the leather-bound book on the table. "That's worth more than any building. A building is exactly what I need, though, along with an oven, flour, yeast, sugar, pans, everything." Sarah felt the weight of impossibility settle over her shoulders. It would take years to save enough to start over, and that's assuming I could even find work. Owen was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Then he looked at her, his brown eyes serious and determined. "Let's rebuild it together starting today." Sarah blinked, certain she had misheard. "What? Your bakery? Let's rebuild it together." Owen leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Listen, I've been working at the lumber camp and I've saved most of my wages. I can get lumber at cost, maybe even convince some of the boys to help with the heavy work. You know how to run a bakery, and Lord knows this town needs one. We could be partners." "You don't even know me," Sarah protested, though her heart had begun to beat faster. "Why would you risk your savings on a stranger?" "Because I watched you stand in that flood, holding on to that recipe book like it was the most precious thing in the world. Because I've tasted your bread and know you're the best baker in Alaska. And because—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Because everyone deserves a second chance, and I've got the means to help give you one. I couldn't pay you back for years, maybe never. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to be my partner. We rebuild the bakery together, we run it together, and we split the profits. 50-50. Owen extended his hand. "What do you say, Miss Prescott?" Sarah looked at his outstretched hand, rough and strong, offering her hope when she had thought none existed. It was crazy. It was impulsive. It was possibly the worst business decision either of them could make. But as she looked into Owen Walker's honest eyes, she found herself believing that maybe, just maybe, it could work. She took his hand. "Call me Sarah. And yes, I say yes." Owen's face broke into a genuine smile, transforming his serious features into something warm and approachable. "Then we start planning tomorrow. Tonight you rest. You can take the bed, I'll sleep by the fire." "I can't take your bed," Sarah argued. "You can and you will. I've slept on harder ground than this floor, and you've had the worst day of your life. Don't argue with me on this." His tone brooked no disagreement, but it was kind. Too exhausted to protest further, Sarah nodded. As the evening wore on and the rain finally began to ease, she found herself talking with Owen about everything and nothing. He told her stories about Montana, about herding cattle through mountain passes, and sleeping under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. She told him about her mother's bakery in Oregon, about learning to fold butter into kvass dough when she was barely tall enough to reach the counter. When her eyes finally grew too heavy to keep open, Owen banked the fire and helped her to the bed, arranging the blankets with surprising gentleness. Sarah fell asleep to the sound of rain on the roof and the quiet movements of the cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere to offer her hope. She woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window and the smell of coffee brewing. Owen was already up, dressed in clean clothes, his dark hair still damp from washing. He glanced over when he heard her stirring. "Morning. How do you feel?" Sarah sat up, clutching the blankets around her. Her dress hung by the fire, dry now. "Better than I did yesterday. Is the flooding done?" Waters receding. "I rode down at first light to check. It's bad, Sarah. Real bad. Half the town is damaged and your bakery." He trailed off, sympathy in his eyes. Gone completely. The building's still standing, but everything inside is ruined. It'll need to be gutted and rebuilt from the foundation up. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes but forced them back. Then I suppose we should go look at what we're working with. They ate a quick breakfast of oatmeal and coffee, and Owen politely stepped outside while Sarah dressed in her now dry clothes. The fabric was stiff from the flood water, but it would do until she could get new garments. She braided her long brown hair, wishing for a mirror but knowing vanity was the least of her concerns. The ride back into Fairbanks was sobering. In the daylight, the destruction was even more apparent. Buildings leaned at odd angles, their foundations undermined by the flood. Debris covered the muddy streets, and people moved through the town with shocked, hollow expressions. Sarah's heart ached for all of them. Everyone had lost something. Some had lost everything. Her bakery stood at the corner of Front Street and Cushman, a small wooden structure that had once been painted cheerful yellow. Now it was coated in mud, the windows blown out, the door hanging from one hinge. Owen helped her dismount, and together they approached the building. Inside was worse than Sarah had imagined. Everything was covered in thick mud and silt. Her beautiful work table was buried under debris. The cast iron stove had been knocked over. Broken jars and ruined flour sacks created a mess that seemed insurmountable. Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. Owen's hand found her shoulder, warm and reassuring. "We can fix this. I know it looks impossible, but we can fix it." "How?" Sarah whispered. "One step at a time. First, we clean out the debris, then we assess the building's structure, make sure it's sound. We repair what can be repaired and replace what can't." Owen walked through the space, examining the walls and floor with a practiced eye. "The foundation looks solid, actually. That's good. The walls might need some reinforcement, but they're salvageable." Over the next several hours, they worked side by side, hauling out ruined equipment and debris. Other townspeople were doing the same at their own properties, and occasionally someone would stop to offer sympathy or share their own tale of loss. Sarah recognized many of her regular customers, people who had depended on her bread and pastries. "We'll get you open again, Miss Sarah," said Tom Harper, who owned the general store 2 streets over. "This town needs your bakery." As the afternoon wore on, Owen made a list of everything they would need. Lumber for repairs, a new stove if Sarah's couldn't be salvaged, replacement windows, fresh supplies once they were ready to bake again. The list grew longer and more daunting, but Owen approached each item methodically, estimating costs and making notes in a small leather journal he produced from his pocket. "I'll head to the lumber camp tomorrow, talk to the foreman about getting materials," Owen said as they took a break, sitting on the front step and sharing water from his canteen. "Some of the boys owe me favors. I think we can get a work crew together for the heavy lifting." "Why are you doing this?" Sarah asked suddenly. "Really? You barely know me." Owen was quiet for a moment, watching the people move through the damaged street. "My folks died when I was 12. The neighboring rancher could have left me to fend for myself, but instead he took me in, taught me everything about cattle and horses. He didn't have to do that. When I asked him why, he said it was because someone had helped him once when he needed it, and the only way to repay that kind of debt was to pass it forward." Owen looked at her, his brown eyes serious. "Maybe I'm passing it forward now. Or maybe I just think you deserve better than to lose everything you've worked for." Sarah felt something warm unfold in her chest, something that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. "Thank you, Owen, truly. Don't thank me yet. We've got months of hard work ahead of us." But he smiled as he said it, and Sarah found herself smiling back. They worked until sunset, making as much progress as they could. Owen insisted on taking Sarah back to his cabin rather than letting her try to find lodging in the damaged town. She protested at first, worried about her reputation, but Owen pointed out that half the town was displaced, and no one was going to judge anyone for taking shelter where they could find it. That night, Sarah lay in Owen's bed again, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the cowboy sleeping by the fire. She had known him less than 2 days, yet he had already changed her life completely. There was something about him that felt solid and dependable, a steadiness that she found herself drawn to. The next morning, Owen rose early and saddled his horse. "I'm heading to the lumber camp. Should be back by evening. Will you be all right here?" "I'll walk into town, see if I can help with the cleanup efforts," Sarah said. "Maybe check on some of my neighbors." Owen hesitated, then reached into a small wooden box on the shelf and pulled out a few coins. "Take this. You'll need to eat, and you should get yourself at least one change of clothes." "Owen, I can't keep taking from you." "Yes, you can. We're partners now, remember. What's mine is yours, at least until we get the bakery running again." He pressed the coins into her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Please, Sarah, let me help." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Owen squeezed her hand once, then released it and headed out. Sarah spent the day in town, helping where she could. She assisted an elderly couple clean out their flooded home, helped the schoolteacher salvage water-damaged books, and joined a group of women preparing food for those who had lost their kitchens. The work was exhausting but good, keeping her mind off her own problems. She also stopped at the general store, where Tom Harper refused to take money for a simple calico dress and fresh undergarments. "You'll pay me back when you're on your feet again," he said firmly. "We take care of our own in Fairbanks." By the time Sarah made her way back to Owen's cabin in the late afternoon, she was exhausted but felt more hopeful than she had since the flood. She changed into the new dress, reveling in the feeling of clean fabric against her skin, and used the water barrel to wash her muddy clothes. Owen returned just before sunset, riding up with a broad smile on his face. "Got good news. The foreman at the camp is willing to sell me lumber at cost, and I've got 6 men willing to help rebuild on their day off this Sunday. They won't take payment, but I said we'd feed them well." "I can do that," Sarah said immediately, "if I can get access to someone's kitchen and some basic supplies. Mrs. Chen at the boarding house said you could use her kitchen. She's one of your regular customers, heard about what happened." Owen dismounted and led his horse to the stable. "We're going to make this work, Sarah. I can feel it." Over the next several days, they fell into a rhythm. Each morning, they would ride into town together and work on the bakery. Owen proved to be skilled with his hands, able to repair damaged walls and reinforce weak spots in the structure. Sarah focused on cleaning, scrubbing away every trace of mud and silt until the interior began to look like a building again rather than a disaster site. They talked while they worked, sharing stories and learning about each other. Sarah discovered that Owen had a dry sense of humor and a surprisingly gentle way with the stray dogs that wandered through town looking for scraps. Owen learned that Sarah had a stubborn streak a mile wide and a tendency to work herself to exhaustion if he didn't insist she take breaks. "You know, you're going to be no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion," Owen said one afternoon, physically taking the scrub brush from her hand. "We're stopping for today." "There's still so much to do," Sarah protested, "and it'll still be here tomorrow." "Come on, there's something I want to show you." Curious, Sarah followed him out of the bakery and to where his horse waited. Owen mounted, then helped her up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, trying to ignore how solid and warm he felt, how right it seemed to be this close to him. They rode out of town, following the Chena River upstream where the banks were higher and the flood damage less severe. The late spring evening was beautiful, the sun hanging low in the northern sky, painting everything gold. Owen guided the horse up a hill overlooking the river valley, then dismounted and helped Sarah down. "Look at that," he said softly. Sarah looked. The view was breathtaking. The river wound through the valley like a silver ribbon, and beyond it, mountains rose purple against the golden sky. Despite the destruction below, the land itself remained beautiful and wild, unchanged by human disaster. "It's incredible," Sarah breathed. "I come here sometimes when I need to remember why I stayed in Alaska," Owen said. "It's easy to forget, especially during the worst of winter or when something like the flood happens. But then you see something like this, and you remember that this land is worth fighting for." Sarah looked at him, at the way the golden light softened his features, and felt her heart skip. When had this happened? When had Owen Walker gone from a stranger to someone whose opinion mattered, whose presence she looked forward to, whose smile could warm her from the inside out? "Owen," she said softly. He turned to look at her, and something in his eyes told her he felt it too, this thing growing between them. "Sarah, Whatever he was going to say was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats. They both turned to see a rider approaching fast. As he got closer, Sarah recognized him as one of the men from the lumber camp. "Owen, we've been looking for you," the man called, reining in his horse. "There's trouble in town. Some men from one of the failed mining camps came in drunk, tearing up what's left of the saloon. Sheriff's trying to handle it, but it's getting ugly." Owen's expression hardened. "How many men?" "6 or 7. They're angry about losing everything in the flood, taking it out on anyone in reach." "All right, take Miss Prescott back to my cabin, make sure she gets there safe." Owen turned to Sarah. "Stay there until I come get you." "Owen, be careful," Sarah said, fear clutching at her chest. He touched her cheek gently just for a moment. "I will, I promise." Then he was mounting his horse and riding hard toward town. Sarah watched him go, her heart in her throat. The lumber camp worker, whose name was Pete, took her back to Owen's cabin as instructed. He waited outside until she was safely inside, then tipped his hat and rode back toward town. Sarah paced the small cabin, unable to sit still, imagining all the ways Owen could be hurt or killed in a brawl with desperate, angry men. Hours passed. The sun finally set around 11, giving way to the brief twilight of the Alaska spring night. Sarah kept the fire burning and coffee warm, unable to do anything else. She picked up her mother's recipe book, trying to distract herself by reading familiar recipes, but the words blurred on the page. It was past midnight when she finally heard hoofbeats outside. Sarah rushed to the door, flinging it open to find Owen dismounting. In the dim light, she could see a cut above his eyebrow and what would likely become a spectacular bruise on his jaw, but he was alive and whole. "Owen." She ran to him without thinking, and he caught her, his arms coming around her in a tight embrace. "I'm all right," he murmured into her hair. "It's all right." "You're hurt," Sarah said, pulling back to examine his face. "Just some scrapes. The other fellows look worse." Owen smiled slightly, then winced. "We got them settled down, got them some food and coffee. They weren't bad men, just desperate and scared. Sheriff decided to let them sleep it off rather than make a bigger mess of things." Sarah pulled him inside, making him sit by the fire while she heated water and found clean cloth to clean his wounds. Owen sat patiently while she gently washed the cut on his eyebrow, his eyes never leaving her face. "You were worried about me," he said softly. "Of course I was worried. You rode into a brawl with drunk, desperate men." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she worked. "You could have been killed, but I wasn't." Owen caught her hand, stilling her movements. Sarah, look at me. She met his eyes, brown and warm in the firelight. I'm not going anywhere, Owen said. I'm going to be here, helping you rebuild your bakery for as long as you need me. Longer if you'll have me. Sarah's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying that somewhere between pulling you out of that flood and now, I stopped thinking about this as just helping a stranger. I'm saying that I wake up looking forward to spending the day with you, and I go to sleep thinking about your smile. Owen stood, still holding her hand, his expression serious and hopeful and nervous all at once. I'm saying that I'm falling in love with you, Sarah Prescott, and if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, I'd like to court you properly. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes, but these were good tears, happy tears. You want to court me, even though I have nothing. You have everything that matters. You have courage and skill and determination. You have kindness and strength. And you have a smile that makes me feel like I've been kicked by a horse in the best possible way. Owen reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face. So yes, I want to court you. If you'll have me. Yes, Sarah whispered. Yes, Owen, I'll have you. He smiled, that wonderful warm smile that transformed his whole face, and then he was kissing her. His lips were gentle despite his split lip, tender and sweet. Sarah melted into the kiss, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck. It felt right, like coming home after a long journey, when they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless. Owen rested his forehead against hers. We're going to do this right. I'll rebuild your bakery, court you proper, and when the time is right, if you'll have me, I'll marry you and spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes to a wandering cowboy. You're not wandering anymore, Sarah said softly. You're home. Yeah, Owen agreed, wonder in his voice. I am. They spent that night talking by the fire, making plans for the bakery and stealing kisses that grew increasingly passionate before Owen reluctantly pulled away. We're doing this right, he reminded her, though his voice was rough with desire. When I make you mine completely, it'll be as my wife, with a ring on your finger and the whole town as witness. Sarah appreciated his honor, even as her body ached for more. She had never felt this way about anyone, this consuming need to be close to someone, to know them completely. But Owen was right. They would do this properly. The following Sunday, true to his word, Owen arrived at the bakery with 6 burly lumber workers ready to help. Sarah had spent the previous days with Mrs. Chen, preparing enormous quantities of food to feed the work crew. She had baked bread in Mrs. Chen's kitchen, made huge pots of stew, and prepared berry pies with the last of the preserved berries from the previous fall. The men worked from sunrise until sunset, and the progress was remarkable. They reinforced the foundation, replaced damaged wall boards, installed new windows, and rebuilt the front entrance. Owen worked alongside them, his shirt off in the warm June sun, and Sarah tried very hard not to stare at the play of muscles in his back and shoulders. Your man is quite something, Mrs. Chen commented with a knowing smile. You are lucky woman. Sarah blushed but didn't deny it. Owen was her man, or at least he was becoming hers. The thought filled her with happiness she had never imagined possible just weeks ago. By the end of the day, the bakery's structure was sound. It would need finishing work, but the heavy labor was done. The crew left tired but satisfied, their bellies full of Sarah's cooking, and Owen closed the door behind the last of them, leaving him and Sarah alone in the empty bakery. It's really happening, Sarah said, looking around the space. We're actually rebuilding it. Did you doubt we would? Owen came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. Sarah leaned into him, savoring the closeness. Maybe a little. It seemed impossible when we started. Nothing's impossible when you have the right person beside you. Owen kissed the top of her head. "We still need to get you a new stove, fresh supplies, all the equipment, but we're on our way." Over the next several weeks, they continued working. Owen used his contacts to find a good used commercial stove, which they installed with help from Tom Harper and his sons. Sarah began accumulating equipment, purchasing items as they could afford them, accepting donations from townspeople who wanted to see the bakery open again. Her mother's recipe book sat prominently on the new work table Owen had built, a link to the past and a promise for the future. They fell deeper in love with each passing day. Owen continued to court Sarah properly, bringing her wildflowers he picked on the hills above town, taking her for evening rides along the river, stealing kisses when they were alone but always maintaining his promise to wait until marriage for anything more. The whole town knew they were courting, and Sarah endured good-natured teasing from her friends and neighbors. "That cowboy is a good man," Tom Harper told her one day as she purchased flour on credit that Owen had arranged. "Don't let him get away." "I don't intend to," Sarah replied with a smile. It was late July when the bakery finally opened again. Sarah had spent the previous week in a frenzy of preparation, building her sourdough starter back to strength, testing the new oven, making sure everything was perfect. Owen had painted the exterior a cheerful yellow again, and Sarah had hung new curtains in the windows. A hand-painted sign above the door read "Prescott's Bakery" in neat letters. Opening day was busier than Sarah had dared hope. It seemed like half of Fairbanks came through the door, buying bread and pastries, congratulating her on rebuilding. Owen worked beside her, helping handle the crowd, his pride in her accomplishment evident in every smile. "You did it," he said that evening after they had closed and counted the day's receipts. "You're back in business." "We did it," Sarah corrected, reaching across the work table to take his hand. "I couldn't have done this without you, Owen. Without your money, your labor, your faith in me." "Partners," Owen said, squeezing her hand. "That was always the deal." "About that partnership," Sarah said, suddenly nervous. "I was thinking we might want to make it more permanent in every way." Owen's eyes widened. "Sarah Prescott, are you proposing to me?" "Maybe I am." "Unless you want to do it." Sarah felt her cheeks heat but held his gaze. "I love you, Owen Walker. You saved me when I had nothing, gave me hope when I was drowning in despair, and somewhere along the way, you became the most important person in my world. I don't want to spend another day without knowing your mind completely." Owen came around the table, pulling her up into his arms. "I was planning to wait until I had a ring. I was going to take you back to that hill overlooking the river and ask you properly." "We can still do that," Sarah said breathlessly, "but I needed you to know how I feel." "I love you too," Owen said, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you so much it terrifies me sometimes. The thought of losing you, of anything happening to you, it makes me crazy." "Then marry me," Sarah said. "Make me yours, make us a family." "Yes." Owen kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and passion into it. "Yes, Sarah, I'll marry you. Tomorrow if you want, or today, or right this second." Sarah laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. "Let's give it at least a few weeks. I want a proper wedding with all our friends there. And I want you to have time to get me that ring you mentioned. Deal?" Owen kissed her again, and this time Sarah let herself fall completely into it, knowing that soon there would be no more holding back, no more stopping. Soon she would be his wife, and the thought sent shivers of anticipation through her. They were married in late August, in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of town. Sarah wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Owen wore his best suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his eyes shining as he watched Sarah walk down the aisle toward him. Tom Harper gave Sarah away, and half the town crowded into the small church to witness the union. When the pastor asked if anyone objected to the marriage, the room remained silent except for a few sentimental sniffles from the women in attendance. "Do you, Owen Michael Walker, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Owen said firmly, his hand warm around Sarah's. "And do you, Sarah Elizabeth Prescott, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Sarah said, her voice clear and certain. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Owen pulled Sarah into his arms and kissed her soundly, to the cheers and applause of their friends and neighbors. Sarah kissed him back, pouring all her love and gratitude and joy into it, knowing that this man had not only helped her rebuild her bakery, but had rebuilt her entire life. The reception was held in the bakery itself, with tables set up and food provided by the community. Sarah and Owen danced to fiddle music, laughed with their friends, and accepted congratulations from everyone who had helped them get to this moment. As the evening wore on and the sun began its late summer descent, Owen leaned down to whisper in Sarah's ear, "Ready to go home, Mrs. Walker?" The name sent a thrill through her. Mrs. Walker, she was Owen's wife now. "Yes," she whispered back. "Take me home." They slipped away from the party, Owen helping Sarah onto his horse before mounting behind her. But instead of heading to his cabin, which was now their cabin, he turned the horse toward town. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked. "You'll see." He led them through the quiet evening streets to a building Sarah didn't recognize at first, then her breath caught. It was a house, a real house with 2 stories and a porch sitting on a lot near the bakery. "Owen, what is this?" "Our house." "Well, it will be once we finish fixing it up." Owen dismounted and helped Sarah down. "The previous owners left after the flood, sold it cheap to Tom Harper. He sold it to me for what he paid, said it was a wedding present. I've been working on it in my spare time, but there's still a lot to do." Sarah walked up to the porch, tears streaming down her face. The house needed work, that much was obvious, but it had good bones. It had a real kitchen, multiple rooms, space for a family. "You did this for us?" she asked. "I did it for you. You deserve a real home, not a one-room cabin." Owen came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "We can take our time fixing it up, do it right. And when we have children, there will be plenty of room for them." "Children," Sarah repeated, turning in his arms to face him. "You want children with me? I want everything with you. Children, grandchildren, growing old together, all of it." Owen cupped her face in his hands. "I want to spend every day of the rest of my life loving you." "Then take me inside our house and make me yours," Sarah said, her voice low and full of promise. "No more waiting." Owen's eyes darkened with desire, and he swept her up into his arms, carrying her through the doorway and into their future. The house was bare inside, just rough wooden floors and walls, but Owen had prepared one room with blankets spread over clean straw, making a soft nest. He set Sarah down gently, then lit the lantern he had left waiting, bathing the room in soft golden light. "I've dreamed about this," Owen said, his voice rough as he reached for the buttons on Sarah's dress. "About making you mine completely." Sarah's hands found the buttons on his shirt, her fingers trembling slightly. "I've dreamed about it too." They undressed each other slowly, reverently, revealing skin inch by inch. When Sarah stood before him in nothing but her skin, Owen's breath caught. "You're so beautiful," he whispered. "So are you," Sarah replied, letting her eyes roam over his muscled chest and arms, the evidence of his hard working life. Owen laid her down on the blankets, covering her body with his own, and Sarah gasped at the feeling of skin against skin for the first time. He kissed her deeply, his hands exploring, learning every curve and hollow. Sarah responded with equal passion, her own hands mapping the planes of his back, the strength in his arms. When he finally joined his body to hers, Sarah cried out at the brief pain, but Owen held her close, whispering words of love and comfort until the pain faded and was replaced by pleasure unlike anything she had ever imagined. They moved together, finding a rhythm as natural as breathing, and when Sarah shattered in his arms, Owen followed moments later, crying her name. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the blankets, skin cooling in the evening air. Owen pulled a quilt over them, tucking Sarah against his side. "I love you," he said softly. "My wife." "I love you too," Sarah replied, placing a kiss over his heart. "My husband." They spent their wedding night in that empty house, making love and talking and making plans for their future. As dawn began to break through the windows, Sarah thought about how far she had come from that terrible day when the flood had destroyed her bakery and all her hope. Owen had appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known to make, and together they had rebuilt not just a building but an entire life. The next several months were busy and happy. Sarah ran the bakery during the day while Owen continued working at the lumber camp, saving money for their future. In the evenings and on weekends, they worked together on the house, repairing walls, painting, making it a home. The community continued to support them, with various people donating furniture or helping with repairs. By the time autumn arrived, the house was livable. Sarah and Owen moved in their few possessions, including Sarah's precious recipe book, which now had a place of honor on the kitchen shelf. The house had a real bedroom, a parlor, a proper kitchen, and 2 additional bedrooms upstairs that stood empty, waiting. "Waiting for what?" Sarah asked Owen one evening as they stood in one of the empty rooms. "Children," Owen said simply, pulling her close. "When they come." "And if I told you one might be coming sooner than you think?" Sarah looked up at him, her hand moving to her still flat stomach. Owen's eyes widened. "Sarah, are you saying—" "I'm pregnant. About 2 months along, I think. Dr. Williams confirmed it this afternoon." Owen let out a whoop of joy and spun her around, then immediately set her down gently, his face panicked. "Did I hurt you? Should you be working so hard at the bakery? What does the doctor say?" Sarah laughed, taking his face in her hands. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass, doctor. Williams says I'm perfectly healthy and can continue working as long as I feel able. But we're going to have a baby, Owen, in late spring around May." "A baby," Owen breathed, his hand covering hers on her stomach. "Our baby." That winter was harsh, as Alaska winters always were, but Sarah and Owen weathered it together. The bakery continued to do well, providing steady income. Owen took fewer shifts at the lumber camp as Sarah's pregnancy progressed, wanting to be close in case she needed him. They spent long evenings by the fire, Owen reading aloud from the newspaper while Sarah knitted tiny garments for the baby. "What do you want to name them?" Sarah asked one evening in late March as the worst of winter finally began to release its grip. "If it's a boy, I'd like to name him after my father, James." Owen's hand found her swollen belly, feeling the baby kick beneath his palm. "If it's a girl, I want you to choose." "If it's a girl, I want to name her Rose after my mother," Sarah said. She would have loved knowing she had a grandchild. "Rose or James Walker," Owen said, testing the names. "Sounds good to me." The baby came in early May during breakup when the river ice was cracking and the world was turning green again. Sarah went into labor early one morning, and Owen ran for the doctor and Mrs. Chen, who had agreed to help with the birth. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night, but when Sarah finally heard her baby's first cry, every moment of pain was forgotten. "It's a boy," Dr. Williams announced, placing the squalling infant on Sarah's chest. "A healthy baby boy." Sarah looked down at her son, his face red and angry, his tiny fists waving, and felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it took her breath away. Owen knelt beside the bed, his eyes filled with tears as he looked at his child. "Hello, James," Owen whispered, touching one tiny hand with his finger. The baby's fist closed around Owen's finger, and Owen let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Hello, son." James Owen Walker was baptized on a beautiful Sunday in June, with half the town in attendance at the church. Sarah held her son proudly, watching as Owen stood beside her, his hand on her back, his expression one of pure joy and pride. They were a family now, complete and whole. The bakery continued to thrive. When James was old enough, Sarah brought him to work with her, letting him sleep in a basket near the ovens while she kneaded dough and baked bread. Customers cooed over the baby, and Sarah found herself dispensing parenting advice along with sourdough loaves to other young mothers in town. Owen eventually left the lumber camp entirely, focusing instead on the bakery and taking odd jobs around town. He proved to be a natural businessman, handling the financial side of things while Sarah focused on baking. Together, they made a formidable team, and the bakery's reputation grew. People came from mining camps miles away to buy Sarah's bread and pastries. When James was 2 years old, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and when she delivered a daughter in the spring of 1901, the birth was quicker and less frightening. They named her Rose Elizabeth, and she had her mother's brown hair and her father's dark eyes. "2 children," Owen said one evening as they sat on the porch of their house, watching James play in the yard while baby Rose slept in Sarah's arms. "We're truly blessed." "We are," Sarah agreed, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life, that I have you and the children and the bakery and this home. 5 years ago, I was standing in flood water, watching everything I owned wash away. And I was a wandering cowboy with no place to call home," Owen added. "Funny how things work out." "It's more than funny, it's miraculous." Sarah looked up at him. "You saved me, Owen." "No," Owen said, kissing her forehead gently. "We saved each other." As the years passed, the Walker family continued to grow and prosper. James grew into a serious boy who loved helping his father with carpentry projects. Rose was a wild child, always getting into mischief and making her parents laugh. In 1904, Sarah delivered twin boys, Paul and David, much to everyone's surprise and delight. The house that had once seemed too large was now filled with the noise and chaos of 4 children. The bakery expanded, taking over the building next door when the previous occupant moved on. Owen built additional ovens and hired 2 assistants to help Sarah with the increased demand. Prescott's bakery became an institution in Fairbanks, a gathering place where people shared news and gossip along with fresh bread. Sarah's mother's recipe book, now worn and splattered with years of use, was passed down to James when he expressed interest in baking. Owen taught all the children to ride, to work with their hands, to treat others with respect. Together, Sarah and Owen built not just a business but a legacy. On a beautiful evening in June 1910, Sarah and Owen sat on their porch, watching their children play in the yard. James was 16 now, tall and serious, already talking about taking over the bakery someday. Rose was 14, beautiful and spirited, with a line of boys hoping to court her much to Owen's dismay. The twins were 6, identical in appearance but completely different in personality. "You ever regret it?" Sarah asked, taking Owen's hand. "Giving up the cowboy life, settling down here in Alaska." Owen was quiet for a moment, his thumb rubbing across her knuckles. "Not for a single second. This life, with you and our children, it's more than I ever dreamed possible when I was wandering from ranch to ranch with nothing but my horse and a bedroll." "I'm glad you were in Fairbanks that day," Sarah said softly. "I'm glad you found me in that flood." "I'm glad you took my hand," Owen replied. "That you trusted me enough to let me help rebuild your bakery." "Our bakery," Sarah corrected with a smile. "Our bakery," Owen agreed. "Our business, our home, our family, our life, all of it ours together." As the sun set over Fairbanks, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The flood had destroyed her bakery and all her hope, but from that destruction had come something beautiful. Owen had appeared when she needed him most, offering not just help but partnership, friendship, and eventually love. Together they had rebuilt more than just a building. They had built a life, a family, a future. The bakery still stood on the corner of Front Street in Cushman, its yellow paint bright and cheerful, smoke rising from its chimneys every morning before dawn. Inside, the cast iron stove that Owen had found heated ovens where Sarah's bread baked to golden perfection. The recipe book that had survived the flood sat on a shelf, its pages filled with her mother's handwriting and her own notes, a bridge between past and future. Their children would grow up knowing that their parents had faced disaster and come through it together, stronger for the trial. They would learn the value of hard work, the importance of community, and the power of love to overcome any obstacle. The Walker name would become synonymous with quality and integrity in Fairbanks, a legacy that would last for generations. But for now, on this beautiful June evening, Sarah was content to sit beside her husband, watching their children play, grateful for every moment that had led her here. The flood had taken everything from her, but in losing everything, she had found something infinitely more precious. She had found Owen, and together they had built a life worth living. "I love you," she said, squeezing Owen's hand. "I love you too," Owen replied, pulling her close. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after that." As darkness finally fell and the children reluctantly came inside for bed, Sarah and Owen remained on the porch for a while longer, savoring the quiet. The Alaska summer night was brief, twilight giving way to dawn in just a few short hours. But those hours were theirs, a peaceful interlude in the busy life they had built together. Inside, James helped the twins get ready for bed while Rose read them a story, her voice animated as she brought the tale to life. Sarah listened to her children's laughter drifting through the open windows and felt a profound sense of contentment. This was what mattered. This was what the struggle and hardship had been for. This moment, this family, this love. Owen stood, pulling Sarah to her feet. "Come on, Mrs. Walker. Let's go tuck in our children and then get some rest ourselves. Tomorrow's another early morning at the bakery." "Tomorrow and every day after," Sarah said, echoing his earlier words. They went inside together, making the rounds to kiss each child good night. James accepted his mother's kiss with the embarrassed tolerance of a 16-year-old, but Sarah could see the affection in his eyes. Rose hugged them both tightly, still young enough to openly show her love. The twins demanded stories and extra hugs, delaying bedtime as long as possible. Finally, all 4 children were settled and Sarah and Owen retreated to their own bedroom. Owen pulled Sarah into his arms and she went willingly, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For everything." for saving me from the flood, for helping me rebuild, for loving me, for giving me this beautiful life." Sarah looked up at him. "For being exactly who you are." Owen kissed her gently. "You don't need to thank me for loving you. It's the easiest thing I've ever done." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, their bodies knowing each other as well as their hearts did. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Owen's arms around her, Sarah thought about the future. Their children would grow up and have lives of their own. James would likely take over the bakery, carrying on the tradition she and Owen had built. Rose would find someone worthy of her spirit and strength. The twins would forge their own paths, whatever those might be. And through it all, she and Owen would be together, growing old side by side, their love the foundation upon which everything else was built. The flood had been a tragedy, but it had also been the beginning of the greatest blessing of her life. Without that disaster, she might never have met Owen Walker, might never have known this kind of love. As sleep claimed her, Sarah's last thought was one of gratitude. For Owen, for their children, for the bakery that had brought them together, for the community that had supported them, for the life they had built from the ashes of destruction. She had lost everything in the flood, but she had gained so much more in the rebuilding. The years continued to pass in Fairbanks, bringing changes both large and small. Alaska became a territory in 1912, and the town celebrated with a parade and festivities. The Walker children continued to grow, each finding their own path in life. James did indeed take over the bakery, marrying a sweet girl named Anna who learned the baking trade from Sarah. Rose fell in love with a teacher who came up from Seattle, a kind man who appreciated her spirit and intelligence. The twins, inseparable as always, eventually went into business together, opening a general store that competed with Tom Harper's establishment in the most friendly of ways. Sarah and Owen became grandparents in 1918, when James and Anna welcomed a daughter they named Sarah Rose, after both grandmothers. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Sarah felt the circle of life complete itself. Her mother had taught her to bake, she had taught James, and now James would teach his own children. The recipes in that flood-stained book would continue to feed families for generations to come. Owen aged gracefully, his dark hair going silver at the temples, his face weathering into distinguished lines. He still had the strength and capability of a much younger man, still rode his horse through the Alaska wilderness, still built and repaired with skilled hands. But his favorite place was beside Sarah, whether in the bakery, at home, or simply sitting on the porch watching the world go by. They celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary in 1923, with all their children and grandchildren gathered around them. The party was held in the bakery, naturally, with tables laden with bread and cakes and pastries. Friends and neighbors came to offer congratulations and share memories of the early days. "Remember when we thought rebuilding this place was impossible?" Sarah said to Owen as they danced to fiddle music, her head on his shoulder. "I never thought it was impossible," Owen replied. "Not once I had you as my partner." "We've had a good life," Sarah said. "The best life," Owen corrected. "And we're not done yet. We've got years ahead of us still." He was right. They did have years ahead, years filled with watching their grandchildren grow, years of working side by side in the bakery, years of love and companionship. The flood had been 32 years ago, but Sarah still sometimes thought about that terrible day, if only to appreciate how far they had come. As the evening wore on and the party continued around them, Sarah found herself standing in the bakery, running her hand over the worn wooden counter that Owen had built so many years ago. Every scar and mark told a story. the burn mark from when Rose had accidentally tipped a hot pan, the scratch from when the twins had been rough housing and knocked over a rack, the smooth spot where Sarah had kneaded thousands of loaves of bread over the years. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "About how this place is more than just a bakery. It's a testament to what two people can build when they work together, when they love each other." Sarah turned in his arms to face him. "You saved me, Owen Walker, in every way a person can be saved. And you gave me a home, a family, a reason to stop wandering." Owen kissed her forehead. "We saved each other, remember? That's what I said all those years ago, and it's still true today." They stood together in the quiet bakery, surrounded by the evidence of their life's work, and Sarah felt profound gratitude wash over her. The flood had destroyed her first bakery and all her hope, but from that destruction had risen something far greater than she could have imagined. Owen had said they would rebuild it together, starting that very day, and they had done exactly that. But they had built more than just walls and ovens. They had built a life, a family, a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. The years continued their inexorable march. Sarah eventually stepped back from the daily operations of the bakery, content to let James and Anna run things while she enjoyed her grandchildren. Owen slowed down as well, though he never stopped working with his hands, always finding some project that needed his attention. They spent more time together, taking walks along the Chena River, riding out to that hill where Owen had once brought her to see the sunset, simply enjoying each other's company. In 1935, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, a milestone few couples reached. All four of their children were there, along with a growing crowd of grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren. The celebration was enormous, with what seemed like the entire town of Fairbanks turning out to honor the couple who had become an institution. 50 years, Owen mused that night as they lay in bed, Sarah tucked against his side as she had been for half a century. "It doesn't seem possible. 50 years since you pulled me from that flood and promised to help me rebuild," Sarah said. "Best decision I ever made, trusting you." "Best decision I ever made, offering to help," Owen replied. "Everything good in my life came from that choice. You, our children, our grandchildren, all of it." They fell asleep that night as they had for 50 years, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found each other in the midst of disaster and built something beautiful together. Owen passed peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1938, 3 months shy of his 75th birthday. Sarah woke one morning to find him still and cold beside her, a slight smile on his face as if he had died dreaming of something pleasant. The grief was overwhelming, a physical pain that made it hard to breathe. But Sarah took comfort in knowing that Owen had lived a full life, that he had been happy, that he had been loved. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, a testament to the impact Owen had made on the community. James delivered the eulogy, speaking of his father's kindness, his work ethic, his unwavering love for his family. Sarah sat in the front pew, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, drawing strength from them as they drew strength from her. "He loved you so much, Mama," Rose said after the service, holding Sarah's hand. "Everything he did was for you." "And I loved him," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Every day of our life together, I loved him." Sarah lived for another 7 years, continuing to be active in the bakery even though her hands shook now, and her eyesight wasn't what it used to be. She taught her grandchildren to bake, passing down not just recipes but stories of their grandfather, of the flood, of the rebuilding, of the love that had sustained them through everything. In the spring of 1945, as breakup came once more to Fairbanks and the world celebrated the end of a terrible war, Sarah Elizabeth Walker passed away quietly in her sleep, just as Owen had. She was 86 years old, and she had lived a life full of love, work, family, and purpose. At her funeral, James read from the recipe book that had started it all, the book that had survived the flood and become the foundation of their family's livelihood. "This book," he said, holding it up for all to see, "represents everything my mother valued. Tradition, quality, love, and perseverance. She and my father built something that will last long after we're all gone, and they did it together, with love as their foundation." The bakery continued to operate under James's management, and eventually his children took over, and then their children. Prescott's bakery remained a Fairbanks institution well into the 21st century, still using recipes from that original flood-damaged book, still a gathering place for the community, still a testament to what Sarah and Owen had built together. But more than the bakery, their true legacy was the family they created and the love they shared. Every Walker child, grandchild, and great-grandchild grew up hearing the story of how Sarah and Owen met, how the flood destroyed the bakery and all her hope, how a cowboy said, "Let's rebuild it together starting today," and how that decision changed everything. It became a family legend, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found if you were brave enough to reach for it. The story of Sarah and Owen Walker became part of Fairbanks' history, told and retold as an example of resilience and love. Historians studying the 1898 flood always mention the bakery that was rebuilt, the partnership between a baker and a cowboy that became one of the town's great love stories. Their names were inscribed on a memorial plaque at the modern site of what had been their bakery, honoring not just their business acumen but their contribution to the community. In the end, the flood that had destroyed Sarah's bakery and all her hope had been the catalyst for the greatest blessing of her life. Owen had appeared when she needed him most, offering not just practical help but genuine partnership and love. Together, they had rebuilt not just a bakery but an entire life, creating something lasting and beautiful from the ashes of disaster. Their story was one of hope found in darkness, of love built through shared struggle, of two people who met by chance and chose to build a future together. It was a reminder that even when everything seems lost, when the flood waters rise and wash away all you have worked for, there is always hope. Sometimes that hope comes in the form of a cowboy on horseback, extending his hand and saying the words that will change your life forever. "Let's rebuild it together, starting today." And so they had, creating a legacy that would endure for generations, a testament to the power of love, perseverance, and two people choosing each other every single day. The flood had been a tragedy, but from that tragedy had come the greatest love story Fairbanks had ever known, a story that would be told and retold for as long as the town existed, inspiring others to reach for hope even in their darkest moments. Sarah and Owen Walker had lived, loved, and built something remarkable together, and their story would never be forgotten. It would live on in their descendants, in the bakery that still bore the Prescott name, in the house they had made a home, and in the hearts of everyone who heard their tale and was reminded that love can conquer even the most devastating of disasters. They had proven that with the right partner by your side, anything was possible, even rebuilding from nothing, even creating something beautiful from destruction, even finding your forever love in the midst of tragedy. That was their legacy, and it was enough.